No, that's very true because, the concept of refuseniks, also the concept of so many Israeli military veterans who have left the IDF.
Yeah.
The context of the most interesting context was when Netanyahu came for his fourth address to the Congress on 25th of July. There were Jewish protesters outside protesting against him coming and addressing to the Congress. So those are very interesting, parallel developments that are happening, especially in Columbia University also, where most of the students were also Jewish who were but together they were dancing with the Palestinian or the Arab Muslims and others. Now my next question is, like, before we deal into the broader framework of Middle East, I would like to tell the audience that UK currently has ties with Saudi Arabia, which are political and diplomatic, especially when it comes to arms sales and military training. With UAE, it has a very strong, in UAE itself, there is a strong British expatriate community or diaspora. It has defense cooperation and arms sales with Qatar. It has trade, investment, infrastructure. In fact, Al Jazeera's London office, I have heard, is way larger and grander than the Doha one, but I have not been to any, so I don't know. Then it has ties, military ties, and historic ties with Kuwait, specifically military training ties. With Iraq. It has diplomatic ties after the 2003 invasion, I would call it, of Iraq under Tony Blair's leadership. And it is invested also in humanitarian efforts. With Israel, it has strong diplomatic ties, specifically also in trade and technology and defense cooperation. With the Palestinian territories, UK has always supported a two-state solution as for now, and given aid and development. Specifically, I think they have started funding the UNRWA again.
They
Yeah,
restored it. They
yeah,
restored that.
restored
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
And with Jordan, they have strong diplomatic contacts. They support Jordan in hosting a lot of Syrian refugees who have migrated after the Syrian civil war or the Arab uprising in Syria in 2011. With Iran, UK has a very complex and cautious diplomatic relation, specifically on the nuclear issue. It has limited trade when it comes to sanctions. It has concerns over regional activities of Iran. With Lebanon, it has diplomatic support and stability, development aid support, specifically for the Syrian refugees that are in Lebanon as of now. So, with this broad spectrum in mind, Professor Lucas, what do you think under the Labour government? What would be the change of UK's foreign policy in Middle East?
Let's take a couple of starting points
Yeah,
because this is a huge region to be covering
yeah,
and to work on. And I think the first starting point here is the change from past and present, which is when you identified, for example, the question of colonialism and what comes after,
yeah,
right? And that is, we can be very critical about what the UK has done in the Middle East for a very long time, but they had a joined up approach in terms of what they wanted to do.
yeah,
They wanted to be the leading power in the Middle East.
yeah,
Uh, yeah, and we can talk about all the countries you talked about that were part of at one point the British Empire, or that were, even if they were nominally independent, the UK had effectively the dominant military or economic influence. Now, 1956 and the disastrous failure in Suez when they tried
yeah,
to overthrow the
yeah.
Egyptian government of Nasser,
Nasser, yeah,
that certainly dented that. And of course, within a couple of years, their position had been minimized in Jordan. The Iraq Revolution effectively chucked them out in 1958.
yeah,
They by the 60s they were reduced to what to really being in the Gulf countries on that perimeter of the Arabian Peninsula, Bahrain, UAE, Kuwait, Oman. But that said, you could still say through the 70s and through the 80s that they wanted to project the fact, look, we were the power that was there, right? We were the power.
yeah,
And that's part of the legacy why you continue to have all the arms contracts with the Gulf states, for example. You get to 2024, and there's not really a joined up UK policy on the Middle East and North Africa as such, right? Indeed, it got to the point where in 2022, the uh, Foreign Office got rid of its Assistant Secretary of State for the Middle East and North Africa. They just
Okay.
got rid of the position. Now, that position has been restored, but only by including South Asia. So you all are now lumped in with the Middle East and North Africa in terms of uh, the responsibility, the oversight
Yeah.
for it, right? I can't recall a clear UK government policy document, let alone strategic document on the Middle East as a region. There may be individual documents on Yemen, there may be an
Yeah.
individual document on Israel Palestine, but there's not really a coherent document in terms of, all right, where are we now? Where are we going in terms of a regional approach? And I think if you want the seeds for where this all comes undone, if you go back to 2003 with the disastrous decision to support the Americans in the invasion of Iraq,
Yeah.
there was an attempt by Blair. There was an attempt by Blair, and people forget this, I think, which is okay, we'll support you in Iraq,
Yeah.
but we want you to commit. We want you to commit to meaningful negotiations for a two-state solution,
Mm-hmm.
right? State of Palestine. Of course, the Americans invaded Iraq, and then they really didn't do it. They didn't do a
Yeah.
damn thing about a two-state solution. It was only when the Obama administration came
Mm-hmm.
on board that you had
Mm-hmm.
that effort. You know, that's almost like the UK's last shot in terms of a unified approach that takes place. What happens is the UK really falls into bilateral relationships.
Yeah.
A lot of this economic links, not just arms, but also trade. And it is important to note that the UK is the seventh largest trade partner for the Gulf states,
Yeah.
and that trade has gone up from $19 billion to around about $77 billion. It was $19 billion in around 2010, and it's 77 billion now, right?
Yeah.
So that's a pretty sharp increase. That's a 300% increase in 15 years. So, and post Brexit, those trade links are even more important because the UK needs trade deals somewhere,
Yeah.
as you all
Yeah.
know, in India, right?
Yeah.
But that tends to be on bilateral basis. So, for example, they declare that they have a strategic partnership council with Saudi. They have a strategic dialogue with the UAE, right?
Yeah.
But these are individual initiatives. And if you want an example of what that means in terms of where it all falls apart, they have no coherent policy on Syria now. Having been
Yes.
involved,
Yes. Yeah.
having been involved in supporting the opposition to try to hold out against the Assad regime and its mass murder, they have no coherent policy on Libya, having been involved as part of the coalition to remove Gaddafi.
Yeah.
They really don't have a clear policy on Egypt, having been involved in the coalition around the time that Mubarak was thrown out,
Yeah.
right? Um, Earlier this year, there was an attempt by David Cameron, the former prime minister,
Hmm.
when he became foreign secretary, who said, well, okay, we're going to at least become more visible on Israel and Palestine. And that was because of the Gaza conflict. And it was saying, that's when it said, oh, okay, we will aid to Gaza is a priority. And if Israel doesn't provide aid, we might have to consider what we're doing, right? And they said we will review arms exports to Israel. They tried to put themselves more in terms of a line of being a broker.
Mm-hmm.
Under They did distance themselves from the U.S. in terms of being much more forthcoming in the Security Council towards a ceasefire resolution earlier this year. And I don't think that was just simply to cover up the American veto. I don't think it was like this game the two of them played. I do think there was a
Yeah.
bit of a distance, but that was just simply on one part of the Middle East, and it was just a very specific thing. Similarly, when the Houthis start kicking off and causing trouble by
Yeah.
attacking Red Sea shipping, then of course the U.S. leads an armed response. They hit Houthi positions with some
Yeah.
airstrikes, and the Brits chip in as well, right?
Yeah.
But even then, they look more like they're just doing it because Washington's doing it rather than, this is part of a coherent American approach which is taking place.
So
Sorry, coherent British
yeah.
approach. Yeah.
So, but what a lot of academics also say that, even though US is taking the entire onslaught of whatever is happening in Middle East, but the real mind behind it and the power broker is UK. So, with the lack, also because maybe UK doesn't have the nature of having anything, concrete, like the
Yeah.
constitution itself is not very codified. So,
Yeah.
like the different kinds of negotiations that it has bilaterally with different countries. But one thing but that we often forget is what is the role of Tony Blair after leaving office in 2007. From 2007 to 2015, he was appointed as the quartet representative, which was a diplomatic position representing United Nations, the European Union, US, and Russia in the efforts for the Israeli-Palestinian peace process. And he worked in, economic development and institutional building. Then he also, in 2016, founded the Tony Blair Institute for Global Change, which the focus was again Middle Eastern politics, African governments. In private sectors, he's involved in many private entities as a advisor. Um, Now, my question is, um, with uh, starting from Tony Blair's office in charge till right now, till Keir Starmer, with as many prime ministers but a single queen, do you think that UK is in the position to make really hard decisions? Because I don't understand where the money for the arms deal is coming from. Is it taxpayers' money? Is it because after Brexit, it was predicted that UK is going to really suffer from certain kind of financial
Yeah.
meltdown? So, from where is this money coming from that they are funding Saudi Arabia, or they're funding strikes against the Houthis, or they are involved in other kind of bilateral negotiations and arms deals?
Let's start with the easy part first. Selling arms to Saudi Arabia is a moneymaker.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah. So that in fact is, let's be point blank, that's perhaps the driving factor that for British Aerospace, which is one of the world's largest arms manufacturers, perhaps the
yeah,
largest, um, this, and given its connection with the British state, everybody profits the more that they sell to Saudi,
yeah,
right? So
yeah,
there's only become an incentive to sell more arms after Brexit, precisely because the government is in economic difficulty with the
yeah.
distance from the EU. So that partly drives the relationship with the Gulf states. In part, it's driven because the UK has badly damaged its position in other respects. If we were to talk about politics,
Yeah.
if we were to talk about soft power, by what has happened since the Iraq invasion of 2003. I don't think, by the way, I mean, and I'm a strong critic of the UK US special relationship. I don't think the term special relationship should ever be used. I think it's a myth. I think that the UK too often has limited itself because of what America has done. But I don't think the UK is a poodle to the Americans. Tony Blair supported the Americans in 2003 in invading Iraq because Tony Blair believed in that invasion. Uh, you need to get inside Blair's head to understand fully why. He very much, uh, he's a convert to Catholicism,
Okay.
right? He's a
Okay.
devout Catholic. He strongly believed it was almost like a religious mission to liberate the Iraqis.
Wow.
That was almost what it was for Blair, right?
Okay.
Most of the cabinet, many people in the cabinet, I won't say most, but some people in the cabinet opposed uh, joining the Americans. The chief legal advisor uh, to the government uh, said it was not legal, or it might not be legal under international law. Blair pushed all of that aside. He made the decision to join the Americans because of what he wanted, not because of what Washington wanted. But of course, when he did it, it poisoned the well for the British because
Yeah.
they would be associated with the failure in Iraq, which
Yeah.
means that when Tony Blair goes off and becomes this envoy
Yeah.
for the quartet, You have just appointed a man who shares the blame for one of the deadliest interventions in world history,
Yeah.
given the number of Iraqis who die because of that, who shares the blame for the disorder in Iraq that spreads throughout the region, who has tarnished the UK's names with the vast majority of Arab and Muslim people. And you have just appointed him to be the envoy to bring Israel and Palestine together? Really? You think that's going to work? That was done primarily for Tony Blair's ego. And I'm sorry to sound so cynical and so on, but it was. Tony Blair had just left as UK Prime Minister. He wanted to feel important. He's still relatively young. He wants to feel like he's a global statesman. And other world leaders who know him and they pal around with him will make you the envoy. It was a really ridiculous decision. And it's one of the reasons why the quartet is absolutely useless when it comes to Israel and Palestine.
Yeah.
It's now useless, of course, because one member of the quartet is the Russians, and you can't have the Russians really being an above board member of the quartet when they're trying to rip apart Ukraine and
Yeah.
take part of the country there. So, you know, the fact of the matter is that in this period when Blair is swanning around as the envoy, the Americans launched an initiative under Obama, and this was done in good faith, which is to try to get a two-state solution. They do it under a man named George Mitchell,
Yeah.
who was the chief negotiator for the Good Friday Agreement, one of the
Yeah.
big achievements in U.S. diplomacy in Northern Ireland. But because of internal division within the Obama administration,
Yeah.
and because Benjamin Netanyahu doesn't want a two-state solution, that
Yeah.
effort falls apart within a year. And that was the last meaningful. That was the last time there was a meaningful attempt at a two-state solution.
Yeah.
It was in 2009. Think about that, 15 years ago.
Yeah.
So in those past 15 years, Israel Palestine's just been drifting, drifting, drifting. Now it's all sort of fallen apart in the past year. Tony Blair still comes on our TV, or well, not our, I'm in Ireland now, comes on UK TV to talk about how important he is and to
Yeah.
intervene on some issue. And I just look, old man, you had your chance.
Yeah.
You've completely messed it up. Step aside because the UK, until it recognizes that it is in a very different position from 2003,
Yeah.
that it is much more diminished as a power,
Yeah.
until it recalibrates what it does, then there's going to be no coherent policy approach here. You know what I wish the UK would do, and they
Yeah.
won't. They won't because of the Gulf. They won't because of arms sales. I wish the UK would be a lot more like Ireland.
Yeah.
Now, I'm quite
That,
partial. I'm
yeah.
quite partial to Ireland,
Yeah.
but Ireland, of course, has the benefit of being a neutral country and that it
Yeah.
was never a colonial oppressor in the Middle East.
Yeah.
But Ireland puts out the statements which are there, which makes the emphasis on we need to focus on conflict resolution. We need to focus on development and humanitarian aid. We need to step back from military conflict and to reduce the emphasis on military at that point. And we need a much more cooperative arrangement, right, between the states of the region and the international community.